I'm George Harrison, 63 years old, and I never thought my own flesh and blood would betray me like this. After 35 years of building a life, a home, and a family, I found myself standing on my own front lawn with nothing but a small suitcase and the clothes on my back. My son David's words still echo in my mind. My wife's family will live here now, so get out. When I asked where I should go, he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Go to hell." Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely. I grew up in a typical middle-class neighborhood in Allentown, Pennsylvania, during the 60s. My father worked at the steel mill, and my mother was a homemaker who cared for me and my two sisters. We didn't have much, but we had enough. Dad taught me the value of hard work, honesty, and providing for your family. Those lessons stuck with me throughout my life. I met Linda during my sophomore year at Penn State. She was studying nursing and I was pursuing civil engineering. We bumped into each other at the library, literally bumped into each other. I knocked her books out of her hands, and as I helped pick them up, our eyes met. That was it for me. I knew right then she was special. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. We married right after graduation in 1984, both of us 23 years old and ready to take on the world together. We moved to a small apartment in Pittsburgh, where I landed my first job with a construction company, and Linda worked at the local hospital. For 5 years, we tried to have children. It was a difficult journey filled with doctor appointments, treatments, disappointments, and tears. Linda suffered 2 miscarriages, and each one broke both our hearts. Just when we were beginning to accept that maybe children weren't in our future, Linda got pregnant with David. The pregnancy was high risk, so Linda had to stop working and stay on bed rest for the final trimester. I picked up extra shifts to cover the medical bills and make up for her lost income. David Matthew Harrison was born on April 15th, 1990. I'll never forget holding him for the first time, this tiny human that Linda and I had created together. He had his mother's eyes and my stubborn chin. Linda called him our tax day miracle. After all we'd been through, David was our everything. When David was 15, Linda started getting headaches. At first, we thought it was just stress or maybe she needed glasses. But the headaches got worse. When she started forgetting things and dropping objects, we knew something was wrong. The diagnosis came like a sledgehammer: brain cancer stage 4, inoperable. Linda fought hard, but the cancer fought harder. Within 8 months, she was gone. David and I were devastated. I was 44 years old, a widower, and suddenly a single father to a teenage boy who had just lost his mother. Those were dark days for both of us. I did my best to be both mother and father to David. I learned to cook meals beyond just grilling burgers. I figured out how to talk about girls and school problems. I attended every baseball game and school event. Were there times I messed up? Absolutely. But everything I did out of love for my son and to honor Linda's memory. David struggled through his grief by throwing himself into schoolwork and sports. He was a smart kid, got straight A's without much effort. He was also popular, played baseball, and had a good group of friends. I was proud of how he handled himself during such a difficult time. Looking back now, I realize I might have overcompensated by rarely saying no to him. I wanted to ease his pain, so perhaps I indulged him too much. The house we lived in became even more special after Linda passed. We had purchased it when David was just 3 years old, a modest 4-bedroom colonial in a good school district with a nice yard. Linda had lovingly decorated every room. She planted the garden in the backyard and painted the kitchen herself. Her touch was everywhere. For 30 years we paid that mortgage faithfully. There were times when money was tight, especially during Linda's illness, when medical bills piled up. But I never missed a payment. I wanted to make sure David and I always had a secure home. The day I made the final mortgage payment, 5 years after Linda died, I sat in the backyard with a beer and cried. I had kept my promise to her that I would take care of our home and our son. Every corner of that house held memories of Linda. The kitchen, where she taught David to make her famous chocolate chip cookies. The living room, where we'd watch movies together every Friday night. The backyard, where she tended her roses. The front porch, where we'd sit on summer evenings watching the neighborhood kids play. After she died, those spaces became both painful and comforting to me. Sometimes I'd find David sitting in her garden just to feel close to her. I retired at 60 after 38 years as a civil engineer. The company gave me a nice watch and a retirement party. David, who was 23 by then and had just finished college, gave a speech about how I had been his rock through everything. I remember feeling so proud of the young man he had become, or at least the young man I thought he had become. During his college years, David started to change. At first, I attributed it to normal growing up. He came home less frequently. His calls became shorter and more infrequent. When he did visit, he seemed distracted, always on his phone. I told myself this was just part of him becoming independent. All young adults go through this phase, right? David graduated with a business degree and got a job at a marketing firm in the city. He seemed to be doing well, although he rarely shared details about his work or his life. I figured he was just busy establishing himself. I tried not to pry, wanting to respect his privacy and independence. Then, when David was 25, he called with exciting news. He had met someone special named Jessica. He sounded happier than he had in years. I was thrilled for him and eager to meet the woman who had brought joy back into my son's life. The first time David brought Jessica home, she was charming and polite. She complimented the house, asked about family photos, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. She was beautiful, tall blonde, perfectly manicured, and clearly from a more affluent background than ours. She spoke about her family's vacation home in the Hamptons and her private school education. I didn't care about any of that. What mattered was that David seemed happy with her. Over the next few months, I noticed subtle changes in David. His style of dress became more expensive. He started using phrases and expressions that weren't his. He began making comments about our neighborhood being quaint or modest, words I'd never heard him use before. When I mentioned these changes, he became defensive. "I'm just growing up, Dad," he'd say. "You can't expect me to stay the same forever." I also started noticing how Jessica would make little comments about our house. "This kitchen could really use updating," or "these curtains are so retro." At first, I brushed these off as just observations, but they became more frequent and less subtle. David never defended our home. Instead, he'd agree with her. "Yeah, Dad, this place could use some modernizing," he'd say, as if the home his mother had poured her heart into was suddenly inadequate. There was one incident that should have been a red flag. Jessica was looking at family photos on the mantel and picked up one of Linda holding baby David. "We should get a newer, nicer frame for this," she said, then set it face down on the shelf rather than back in its place. When she left the room, I put the photo back upright. Later, I noticed it was face down again. I never mentioned it to David, but I should have. That small act spoke volumes about what was to come. Despite these concerns, I tried to be supportive of their relationship. David seemed happy. and that's what I wanted for him. When he called to tell me they were engaged, after dating for just under a year, I congratulated them sincerely. Jessica might not have been who I would have chosen for him, but the choice wasn't mine to make. The first time I met Jessica's family was at the engagement dinner they hosted at an expensive restaurant downtown. Robert and Susan Williams arrived 15 minutes late, made a grand entrance, and immediately took over the evening. Robert was a loud, boisterous man with an expensive watch and a habit of name-dropping. Susan was quiet, but scrutinizing her eyes constantly, evaluating everything and everyone. "So, George," Robert boomed across the table after ordering the most expensive wine without consulting anyone. "David tells me you were in construction. Civil engineering," I corrected politely. "I helped design bridges and infrastructure projects across the state for nearly 40 years. "Ah, a government man," he said dismissively. "I've always been in the private sector myself. More opportunities that way." Throughout the dinner, Robert and Susan made subtle comments about my background, my career, and even my suit, which apparently wasn't the right brand or cut. They spoke about their country club memberships and their recent trip to Europe, clearly establishing the difference in our social standings. Jessica's younger sister Amanda was on her phone most of the evening, barely acknowledging my presence. When she did speak, it was to ask her parents for money or to complain about the service. She was 22, but acted 16. Jessica's brother Michael, 31, and apparently between jobs, spent the evening drinking heavily and making inappropriate jokes. At one point, he asked David if he was marrying in for the family connections. Everyone laughed, including David, but I found nothing funny about it. What struck me most was how David behaved around them. My son, who I'd raised to be respectful and humble, was suddenly laughing too loudly, agreeing with everything Robert said, and even mimicking their mannerisms. It was like watching an actor play a role, and not very convincingly. As the evening progressed, the conversation turned to the wedding plans. That's when I learned that Robert and Susan had already booked a venue, an exclusive resort that must have cost a fortune. "We want our little girl to have the perfect day," Susan said, patting Jessica's hand. "Nothing but the best for a Williams wedding." I offered to contribute to the costs, as is traditional for the father of the groom, but Robert waved me off. "We've got it covered, George. You just make sure David shows up on time." The message was clear. My input and contribution weren't needed or wanted. I looked to David, expecting him to say something to include me somehow, but he just nodded along. On the drive home, I tried to discuss it with David. "They seem intense," I said carefully. "They're just successful, Dad," David replied defensively. "They want the best for Jessica, like you want the best for me." I felt a little excluded from the wedding plans, I admitted. David sighed. "It's not really about us, Dad. It's Jessica's day. Her family knows how these things should be done." "And our family doesn't?" I asked, hurt by the implication. "That's not what I meant," he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. As the wedding approached, I was systematically excluded from most decisions and plans. When I suggested including a reading that had been part of my wedding to Linda, a way to honor her memory. At David's wedding, Jessica vetoed it. "We want our wedding to be unique to us," she explained, not unkindly but firmly. "I'm sure you understand." The day of the wedding arrived, and it was an extravagant affair with over 300 guests, most of whom I'd never met. I was seated at a table far from the main wedding party, despite being the father of the groom. When it came time for speeches, I had prepared a heartfelt toast about love commitment, and how proud Linda would have been of the man David had become. But just as I was about to be introduced, Robert stood up and announced they were moving directly to the first dance, to keep things moving. Later, I overheard Susan talking to another guest near the restrooms. "David's done well for himself considering where he came from," she said. "We'll help him shed the last of that middle-class background soon enough." At my own son's wedding, I felt like an outsider. David barely spoke to me the entire evening, too busy impressing Jessica's family and friends. As I drove home alone that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd lost more than just my role as David's primary family. I'd lost a piece of my son. After the wedding, David and Jessica visited even less frequently. They moved into a luxury apartment downtown that I knew David couldn't afford on his salary alone. When they did come to the house, Jessica always had some criticism. "This carpet really needs to be replaced," she'd say, or, "Don't you think it's time to update this furniture? It's so old-fashioned." Each time, David would agree with her, rather than defend our home or my choices. It hurt, but I kept my thoughts to myself, not wanting to create conflict. What troubled me more was how Jessica's family started showing up at my house unannounced. They'd come with David and Jessica, walk around examining things and make comments as if I wasn't there. "This wall could come down to open up the space," Robert would say, tapping on the wall between the dining room and living room. "The master bedroom is quite small," Susan would observe. But I suppose it worked for just one person. Items started disappearing from the house after their visits. Small things at first, like the silver frame that held a picture of Linda and me on our wedding day, or the antique clock that had belonged to my grandfather. When I mentioned these things to David, he'd brush it off. "Are you sure you didn't just misplace them, Dad? You know, at your age." I was 61, not 81, and my memory was just fine. Then one day I came home early from a lunch with a former colleague to find Jessica in the house alone. David had given her a key without telling me. She was in Linda's sewing room, which I had kept exactly as it was since her death, measuring the walls with a tape measure. "What are you doing?" I asked, startled to find her there. She didn't even look embarrassed. "Just getting some measurements. This room would make a perfect nursery, don't you think?" "A nursery?" "Are you pregnant?" I asked, confused and concerned. "Not yet," she smiled, "but we will be eventually, and we're just planning ahead." "Planning ahead for what exactly?" I asked, my suspicion growing. "Oh, nothing specific," she said evasively. "David didn't mention I'd be stopping by. I'm sorry about that." When I confronted David about it later, he became defensive immediately. "Jessica was just trying to help, Dad. This place could use some updating, especially if you're thinking about selling eventually." "Selling? I have no plans to sell this house, David. This is our family home." "Well, you know you're not getting any younger. Eventually you might want something smaller, easier to maintain." It was the first time he had suggested I should move out of my own home, but it wouldn't be the last. A few months later, David called with news that Jessica's parents were having financial difficulties. Their real estate investment business had suffered some setbacks, and they were facing foreclosure on their own home. "That's terrible," I said sincerely. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "Actually, Dad, that's kind of why I'm calling," David said. "They're looking for a place to stay while they sort things out. I offered to help them find an affordable rental, or even loan them some money if needed." David hesitated before responding. "Well, they're really particular about where they live. They have certain standards." Something about his tone made me uneasy. "What are you suggesting, David?" "I was thinking maybe they could stay with you for a while. You have all those empty bedrooms, and the house is too big for just one person anyway." The request took me by surprise. "David, I barely know your in-laws, and from what I've seen, I'm not sure we'd get along well living under the same roof." "Dad, they're family now," he said, his voice taking on that tone of disappointment he'd perfected lately. "This is what families do for each other." I reluctantly agreed to think about it, But the conversation left me troubled. Something didn't feel right. A few days later, my neighbor Tom stopped by while I was working in the yard. "Hey, George, I saw some folks looking at your house yesterday. Are you thinking of selling?" "What, no?" "I'm not selling," I said, confused. "What people?" "An older couple with a real estate agent. They were walking around the property, pointing at things. I assumed you had it on the market." A chill ran down my spine. I thanked Tom and went inside to call David immediately. He didn't pick up. I left a message asking him to call me back urgently. Later that week, I came home to find sticky notes placed around the house on furniture appliances, even some of Linda's decorative items. Each had a name written on it: Robert, Susan, keep, or donate. I was standing in the living room, a note that said donate, stuck to Linda's favorite reading chair, when David and Jessica arrived. "What is all this?" I demanded, holding up the sticky note. Jessica had the decency to look embarrassed, but David just sighed. "Dad, we were going to talk to you about this. We've been thinking about the future, and with Jessica's parents needing a place to stay." "So you're labeling my belongings without even talking to me first?" I interrupted, anger rising. "This is my home, David. Mine and your mother's." "Mom's been gone for 18 years, Dad," David said coldly. "And this house is too big for you. It makes sense for Jessica's parents to move in. They can help take care of you as you get older." "I don't need anyone to take care of me," I said firmly. "I'm in perfect health, and I have no intention of giving up my home." "We're not asking you to give it up," Jessica interjected smoothly. "We're just suggesting a rearrangement. My parents would take the master bedroom, and you could move into the smaller guest room. It would be easier for you to maintain." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This is my house. I paid for it. Your parents are not moving in here, and I'm certainly not giving up my bedroom." David's expression hardened. "You're being selfish, Dad. Her parents are family now, too." "Family doesn't try to take over someone else's home," I shot back. The conversation ended badly with David and Jessica leaving in anger. But that was just the beginning of the pressure. Over the next few weeks, Jessica's family showed up with increasing frequency. They'd arrive unannounced sometimes when I wasn't home, using the key David had given Jessica. I'd come back to find them measuring rooms, examining my belongings, or sitting in my living room, as if they already lived there. One evening, they invited themselves over for dinner, all of them including Amanda and Michael. Throughout the meal, they discussed their plans for when we move the furniture and how we'll redecorate. They talked about me as if I wasn't sitting right there at my own table. "George probably doesn't need all these dishes," Susan said, opening my kitchen cabinets without permission. "We can donate most of these." "The garage needs to be cleared out," Robert declared. "I'll need space for my woodworking equipment." When I tried to object, David would cut me off or change the subject. After they left, I confronted him. "This has gone too far, David. They're acting like they already own my house." "Dad, we're trying to help you," he insisted. "You can't live alone forever. We're just planning for the future." "My future does not include your in-laws taking over my home," I said firmly. The night before everything came to a head, I overheard David on the phone in the backyard. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but his words caught my attention. "We've found a few retirement communities that might work," he was saying. "Some nice ones about an hour away. Yeah, we're meeting with the lawyer tomorrow. No, I don't think he'll sign willingly, but we've discussed options. Don't worry, by next month you'll be all settled in." My blood ran cold. They weren't just planning to move in. They were planning to move me out. The next day, David and Jessica arrived with a manila envelope. They suggested we sit down in the living room, their manner unnervingly businesslike. "Dad, we need to talk about the future," David began, placing the envelope on the coffee table. "What's in the envelope, David?" I asked directly. Jessica smiled her perfect smile. "Just some paperwork that would make things easier for everyone." David pulled out several documents. "These are transfer of deed papers, Dad. We think it would be best if you signed the house over to us." I stared at them in disbelief. "You want me to give you my house, the house I paid for, the house your mother and I built our lives in?" "It's for your own good," David said, not meeting my eyes. "You're getting older, and this place is too much for you to handle. Jessica's parents can move in and help maintain it. You can move to Sunny Pines. It's a really nice retirement community. I'm 63 years old, in perfect health and fully capable of maintaining my own home." I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. "I have no intention of moving to any retirement community or signing over my house." "Dad, you're being unreasonable." David sighed. "This is the best solution for everyone." "Everyone except me," I countered. "What's really going on here, David? Is this about Jessica's parents losing their home? Is that why you want mine?" Jessica's calm facade cracked slightly. "My parents need somewhere to live that meets their standards. Your house is the perfect size and in a good neighborhood. You don't need all this space. So this is a land grab," I said flatly. "You want to kick me out of my own home so your parents can move in." "No one's kicking you out," David insisted. "You can stay in the guest room until the retirement community has an opening." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own son was trying to take my home and relegate me to a guest room before shipping me off to a retirement facility. "I will not sign these papers," I said firmly. "This conversation is over." David's expression hardened. "I was afraid you'd be difficult about this." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "You might as well come in now," he said, to whoever was on the other end. To my shock, Jessica's entire family filed into my living room. Robert, Susan, Amanda, and Michael, as if they had been waiting just outside. They created a united front, standing behind David and Jessica like some kind of family firing squad. Robert took charge immediately. "George, be reasonable. This arrangement makes sense for everyone. You get taken care of in your old age, and we all get to stay together as a family." "This is my house," I repeated, standing up to face them all. "I paid for it. I own it. I'm not giving it to anyone, and I'm not moving out." "You're being selfish," Susan said coldly. "Think about what's best for David and Jessica's future." "I've thought about nothing but David's future his entire life," I replied. "But this isn't about his future. This is about taking advantage of me." "Dad, I think you're getting confused," David said in a patronizing tone. "Your memory hasn't been the best lately. Remember how you couldn't find your car keys last week?" "I'm not confused, and there's nothing wrong with my memory," I said, my anger growing. "I want all of you to leave my house right now." "George, I think you might be experiencing some cognitive decline," Susan suggested with false concern. "It happens at your age. All the more reason you shouldn't be living alone." I looked at each of their faces, these strangers who had invaded my home and were trying to take everything from me. And then I looked at David, searching for any sign of the son I had raised, the boy who had once looked at me with love and respect. I saw nothing familiar in his eyes. "David, please," I said, making one last attempt to reach him. "Think about what you're doing. This is your childhood home. This is where your mother and I raised you." Something flashed across his face, regret, perhaps, or shame. But Jessica squeezed his hand, and whatever moment of doubt he might have had vanished. "My wife's family will live here now," he said coldly. "So get out." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. David looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Go to hell." Jessica's family nodded in agreement. Michael even smirked. They stood there, a wall of entitled strangers, having successfully turned my son against me. "You have 1 hour to pack what you need," David continued. "The rest we'll donate or sell." "You can't do this," I protested. "This is my house. Legally, you have no right. We have documentation of your mental decline," Jessica interrupted smoothly. "And David has power of attorney." This was news to me. "What power of attorney? The one you signed last year," David claimed. "Don't you remember? I had signed no such document, and we both knew it. But it was clear they had planned this carefully. In a daze, I went upstairs to pack Jessica following close behind, to help me, though I knew she was really there to make sure I didn't take anything valuable. I grabbed clothes, toiletries, some personal papers, and the few photos of Linda they hadn't already removed. The frames that had held photos of her on the walls were already empty. As I packed, I tried one more time to reason with David, who stood in the doorway watching. "David, please don't do this. This isn't you. This isn't how your mother and I raised you." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the son I knew. But then Jessica appeared beside him, her hand possessively on his arm, and his expression hardened again. "Time's up," he said. "We'll send anything important to whatever address you end up at." With just a small suitcase of belongings, I walked down the stairs of my home for what I thought would be the last time. As I reached the front door, I turned to look at the house Linda and I had made into a home, at the life we had built now being seized by strangers. "David," I said, my voice breaking, "you're making a terrible mistake." "Goodbye, Dad," was all he said. The door locked behind me with a definitive click, and I stood on the front lawn, homeless and heartbroken, a 63-year-old man cast out by his only child. The rain started as I walked away from the house, a light drizzle at first that quickly turned into a downpour. It felt appropriate, the heavens weeping for what had just transpired. I had no idea where to go or what to do. My car was still in the garage, and I hadn't thought to grab the keys in the shock of being evicted. My cell phone had less than 20% battery left. I walked for about a mile to a small motel off the main highway. It wasn't much, a dated 2-story building with exterior corridors and a flickering neon sign, but it was shelter. The young woman at the front desk gave me a curious look as I checked in, soaking wet and carrying just a small suitcase, but she didn't ask questions. Room 118 was basic, a queen bed with a worn floral bedspread, a small desk, an older TV, and a bathroom with cracked tiles. But it was clean and dry. I set my suitcase on the bed and sat beside it, the full weight of what had happened finally crashing down on me. My son had thrown me out of my own home. He had chosen his wife's family over me. He had looked me in the eyes and told me to go to hell. After everything, after the years of love, sacrifice, and devotion, this was how it ended. I didn't cry. I was too shocked, too numb. I sat there for hours, staring at the wall, replaying the day's events in my mind, trying to understand how we had reached this point. When had David changed so completely? When had I lost him to Jessica and her family? What signs had I missed? Sleep didn't come that night. I lay awake, listening to the occasional car passing on the highway, the hum of the ancient air conditioner, the dripping of the bathroom faucet. By morning, I had no more clarity than the night before, but the initial shock had worn off, replaced by the crushing reality of my situation. I had about $2,000 in my checking account that I could access with my debit card. My retirement savings and investments would take time to liquidate, and I wasn't even sure how to begin that process. My Social Security checks were direct deposited, but I'd need to change the address. More immediately, I realized I had only packed 3 days' worth of clothes. I had no medications with me, no toiletries beyond the basics, none of my important documents like my birth certificate or social security card. I hadn't even grabbed my reading glasses. The magnitude of starting over at 63 hit me hard. Where would I live? How would I get around without my car? What about all the possessions accumulated over a lifetime? The mementos of Linda had carefully preserved. As I sat on the edge of the motel bed that morning, I felt utterly alone and abandoned. Then I remembered Frank. Frank Thompson had been my colleague and friend for over 30 years. We had started at the engineering firm around the same time and had worked on countless projects together. After retirement, we still met monthly for lunch or golf. If anyone would help me in this situation, it would be Frank. I called him from the motel room phone, not trusting my cell battery to last through the conversation. "Frank, it's George. I need help." "George? What's wrong?" "You sound terrible." I tried to explain what had happened, but the words caught in my throat. How do you tell someone that your own child has betrayed you so completely? "David kicked me out. I finally managed. He and Jessica. They want the house for her parents." "What? That doesn't make any sense. It's your house. I know. But they just did it. Last night. I'm at the Skyway Motel right now. I don't have my car, most of my things. I don't know what to do." There was silence for a moment, then Frank's voice, firm and resolute. "I'm coming to get you. Give me the address." 45 minutes later, Frank pulled up in his SUV. He was a big man with a shock of white hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent years on construction sites. When he saw me sitting in the motel lobby with my small suitcase, his expression shifted from concern to outrage. "Jesus, George," he said, pulling me into a bear hug. "What the hell happened?" In his car, I told him the whole story. Jessica and her family's gradual intrusion, the sticky notes, the overheard phone call, and finally the confrontation and eviction. Frank listened in stunned silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Those vultures," he muttered when I finished. "And David went along with this. You're David?" I nodded, the pain of it still raw. "You're staying with us," Frank declared. "Patty would kill me if I didn't bring you home. We've got the guest room and you can stay as long as you need." Patty, Frank's wife of 40 years, was waiting when we arrived at their comfortable suburban home. She took one look at me and immediately went into caretaker mode, showing me to the guest room, offering food, asking what I needed. Their kindness was overwhelming after the cruelty I had just experienced. That evening, after a home-cooked meal I barely tasted, we sat in their living room discussing options. "You need a lawyer, George," Frank insisted. "What they did isn't legal. They can't just kick you out of your own home." "I don't know if I have the strength to fight my own son," I admitted. "And even if I got the house back, how could I ever feel safe there again, knowing what David is capable of?" "This isn't about the house anymore," Patty said gently. "It's about justice. What they did to you was elder abuse, pure and simple." Elder abuse. The term hit me hard. Was that what this was? Had my own son abused me? The thought was almost too painful to bear. "I know a good attorney," Frank offered. "Thomas Walker. He specializes in elder law. At least talk to him. Get some advice on your options." I agreed to meet with the lawyer, but my heart wasn't in it. The betrayal had cut too deep. That night in the unfamiliar bed in Frank and Patty's guest room, the tears finally came. I wept for the loss of my home, for the son I thought I knew, and for Linda, who would have been devastated to see what had become of our family. The next day, while Frank was out picking up some essentials for me, Patty and I sat on their back porch drinking coffee. She had known me and Linda since we were newlyweds and had watched David grow up alongside her own children. "I keep trying to understand when David changed," I said, staring into my cup. "When did money and status become more important than family?" "Some people are easily influenced," Patty offered, "especially if they're trying to fill a void. David lost his mother at a vulnerable age. Maybe Jessica and her family seemed to offer something he was missing." "I thought I had given him everything he needed," I said, my voice breaking. "I tried so hard to be both parents for him after Linda died." "You were a wonderful father, George. This isn't your fault." But part of me couldn't help wondering if it was. Had I spoiled him? Failed to instill the values I thought I had? Missed signs that he was becoming someone I didn't recognize? Later that afternoon, I broke down completely. Frank and I had gone to the park for a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. We passed a father and young son playing catch, laughing together in the sunlight. The scene triggered a flood of memories. David at 7, his face lighting up when I'd come home from work early to play ball with him. David at 10, proudly showing me the science project we had built together. David at 16, somber but strong as we scattered Linda's ashes in her favorite garden. I collapsed onto a park bench, sobbing uncontrollably. Frank sat beside me, his hand on my shoulder, saying nothing, because there was nothing to say. Some pain goes beyond words. That evening I found Linda's wedding ring in my wallet. It was the one thing of real value I had managed to grab before leaving the house. After her death, I had kept it in a small box on my dresser. Somehow, in the chaos of being forced out, I had the presence of mind to slip it into my wallet. Holding that small gold band in my palm, I felt both profound loss and a spark of something else, anger. For the first time since the eviction, I felt angry other than just hurt. Angry at Jessica and her family for their entitled greed. Angry at David for his weakness and betrayal. But most of all, angry at myself for allowing it to happen, for not seeing the signs earlier, for being blindsided by people I should have recognized as predators. I wrote a letter to David that night, a letter I had no means of delivering and no intention of sending. I poured out 18 years of grief since losing Linda, my confusion and pain at his betrayal, and finally my dawning realization that I deserved better than this treatment. I deserved respect. I deserved dignity. I deserved justice. The next morning I agreed to meet with Thomas Walker, the elder law attorney Frank had recommended. It was time to fight back. Thomas Walker's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown. The man himself was about my age, with salt and pepper hair and shrewd eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He listened intently as I recounted everything that had happened, occasionally asking for clarification on dates or specific words used. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said simply, "They broke several laws." "They did?" I asked, surprised by his directness. "Mr. Harrison, what your son and his wife's family did constitutes elder abuse, specifically financial abuse and emotional abuse. They attempted to coerce you into surrendering your property. They made false claims about having power of attorney. They removed you from your legal residence without proper eviction proceedings, and they seized your personal property. Each of these actions is illegal." For the first time since being kicked out, I felt a glimmer of hope. "So I can get my house back?" "Almost certainly." Thomas nodded. "The house is in your name, correct. You have the deed mortgage documents. Yes, I paid off the mortgage 5 years ago. All the paperwork is... well, it was in my home office. We can get copies. The important thing is that without your signature on a legal transfer document, the house remains your property. They have no right to occupy it or to prevent you from entering. What about their claims about my mental state? They mentioned documentation of cognitive decline. Thomas smiled grimly. Unless you've been formally evaluated by a medical professional who has diagnosed you with a condition affecting your decision-making capacity, such claims are meaningless. And even if you had been diagnosed with something, they would still need a court-approved guardianship to make decisions about your property, which they clearly don't have. He explained that we could file for an emergency injunction to remove Jessica's family from the property and restore my access to my home. We could also pursue criminal charges for elder abuse and civil damages for emotional distress and conversion of property. As Thomas outlined the legal options, I felt conflicted. The thought of taking legal action against my own son was painful, but I also knew I couldn't let this injustice stand. "What about David?" I asked. "He's still my son despite everything." Thomas's expression softened. "That's a personal decision, Mr. Harrison. Legally, he participated in actions that harmed you. But as his father, you may choose to handle his part in this differently. We can focus primarily on Jessica and her family, if that's what you prefer." I nodded, grateful for his understanding. "There's something else you should know," I added. "I think Jessica's family has done this before." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that? The whole thing felt too practiced. They knew exactly what to say about my mental state. They had documents ready. They moved with such confidence. And I remember Jessica's brother making a comment once about another property they had acquired through a family arrangement." "That's very interesting," Thomas said, making a note. "If they have a pattern of this behavior that strengthens our case considerably, I'll have my investigator look into their background." By the end of our meeting, we had a plan. Thomas would file for an emergency injunction and police escort to regain access to my home. He would also initiate investigation into Jessica's family's background and prepare for potential criminal charges. In the meantime, I would stay with Frank and Patty and work on gathering any documentation I could about my property ownership and mental fitness. As I left his office, Thomas shook my hand firmly. "Mr. Harrison, what happened to you was wrong on every level, but you're not powerless and you're not alone." Those words stayed with me as I returned to Frank and Patty's house. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't alone. Frank had spent the morning calling some of our old colleagues from the engineering firm, explaining my situation. The response was overwhelming. People I hadn't spoken to in years offered help, temporary housing loans, legal connections. Linda's sister Barbara called from Arizona, furious after hearing what had happened, and announced she was flying in immediately to help. "Nobody messes with my family," she declared over the phone, so much like Linda in her fierce protectiveness that it brought tears to my eyes. The local community center for seniors that I occasionally volunteered at reached out through their social worker, offering resources for displaced older adults and connections to advocacy groups for elder rights. As support poured in, I realized I had an entire network I hadn't even considered. For days I had felt utterly abandoned, but the truth was that I had people, good people who cared about me and were willing to stand by me. Barbara arrived the next day, a whirlwind of energy and righteous anger. She looked so much like Linda that it was sometimes painful to see her, but her presence was exactly what I needed. While Frank helped me with practical matters like getting duplicate keys for my car, which we couldn't yet retrieve, and setting up a temporary bank account, Barbara took it upon herself to investigate Jessica's family. "I've always been the nosy one in the family," she said with a grim smile. "Linda was the nice sister. I'm the one who digs up dirt." And dig she did. Within 2 days, Barbara had uncovered concerning information about the Williams family. Robert's real estate business had a history of complaints and civil suits. There was a pattern of them helping elderly clients with property transactions that somehow always benefited the Williams family tremendously. Nothing had resulted in criminal charges, but the pattern was clear. More disturbingly, Barbara discovered they had pulled a similar scheme with Susan's elderly aunt 3 years prior, moving into her home under the guise of taking care of her, then gradually taking control of her assets before moving her to a care facility and selling her house at a significant profit. "They're predators," Barbara declared, showing me and Thomas the documentation she'd gathered. "And they've been getting away with it because they're well connected and their victims are either too embarrassed or too intimidated to fight back." Thomas was impressed with Barbara's investigative work. "This changes everything," he said. "We're not just dealing with a family dispute anymore. We're looking at a potential pattern of elder exploitation." With this new information, Thomas expedited our legal proceedings. He arranged for a police escort to accompany us to my house the following morning. I spent that night alternating between anticipation of reclaiming my home and dread at confronting David again. "Are you ready for this?" Frank asked as we sat on his back porch that evening. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants my home back more than anything. But another part is afraid of what this confrontation will do to whatever relationship I still have with David." "George," Frank said seriously, "I've known you for most of our adult lives. I watched you raise that boy after Linda died. You've always put him first. But sometimes, standing up for yourself is the best thing you can do for both of you." His words resonated with me. Perhaps by showing David that actions have consequences, I could still teach him one final lesson about respect, dignity, and justice. The next morning, our small convoy assembled Thomas in his car, Officer Jackson and her partner in their patrol car, Frank and Patty in their SUV with me and Barbara in her rental car. As we drove toward the house I had been forcibly removed from just days before, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Whatever happened next, I was no longer facing it alone. We arrived at my house just after 9 in the morning. From the outside, everything looked normal. The same tidy lawn, the same blue shutters Linda had picked out years ago, the same maple tree we had planted when David was born. But it wasn't the same. Inside were people who had stolen my home and broken my heart. Officer Jackson approached the door first, with Thomas and me right behind her. She knocked firmly. "Police, please open the door." There was a long pause, then the sound of hurried footsteps. The curtain in the front window twitched, and I caught a glimpse of Jessica's face, her eyes widening in shock when she saw me standing there with the police. The door opened to reveal Jessica in a silk robe, her perfect composure noticeably rattled. "What's going on?" "Ma'am, we're here to escort Mr. George Harrison back into his residence," Officer Jackson said professionally. "We have documentation confirming his ownership of this property and his right to access it." Jessica's face paled. "There must be some mistake. My husband and I are living here now with my parents." "There's no mistake, Mrs. Harrison," Thomas said, stepping forward and handing her some documents. "This is an emergency injunction signed by Judge Ramirez this morning, confirming Mr. Harrison's right to immediate re-entry to his property and ordering all unauthorized occupants to vacate within 24 hours. Jessica scanned the document, her hands shaking slightly. "You can't do this." My husband has no legal right to exclude his father from this property, Thomas finished for her. Please step aside, or you will be physically removed for obstructing a legal order. Jessica's father appeared behind her, still in pajamas, his face flushed with anger. What the hell is going on here? Robert Williams, Officer Jackson asked. When he nodded, she continued, Sir, you and your family are currently occupying this residence illegally. The legal owner, Mr. Harrison, is here to reclaim his property with a court order authorizing his return and your removal. Robert's face turned an even deeper shade of red. This is ridiculous. David said the house was being transferred to them. Without proper legal documentation or Mr. Harrison's consent, no such transfer has occurred, Thomas explained calmly. The house remains Mr. Harrison's property. Where's David? I asked, speaking for the first time. Jessica and Robert exchanged a look. He's not here, Jessica said stiffly. He's at work. Call him, I said. He needs to be here for this. While Jessica reluctantly called David, we entered the house. I was shocked by what I saw. In just days, they had already made significant changes. My furniture had been rearranged or removed entirely. New expensive pieces I didn't recognize had been brought in. Linda's garden paintings that had hung in the entryway were gone, replaced by modern abstract art. The living room, which had always been comfortable and lived in, now looked like a showroom, sterile and impersonal. Susan was standing in the middle of it, wearing an expensive loungewear set her face a mask of outrage. You can't just barge in here, she exclaimed. We live here now. Actually, Mrs. Williams, you don't, Officer Jackson informed her. You are currently trespassing in Mr. Harrison's home. This is absurd, Robert blustered. We were invited to live here by the homeowner. I am the homeowner, I said firmly, finding my voice growing stronger. And I never invited you to live here. In fact, I explicitly told you that you could not move in. Jessica returned her face tight with anger. David's on his way. But this won't change anything. We have documentation of George's mental decline and David's power of attorney. Thomas smiled coldly. We'd very much like to see that documentation, Mrs. Harrison. In fact, presenting falsified legal documents is a serious offense, as is making false claims of mental incompetence for financial gain. Jessica's confident facade cracked slightly. She glanced at her parents, a flash of uncertainty crossing her face. For the next 20 minutes, we waited in tense silence. I took the opportunity to look around, cataloguing what had been changed, what was missing, what had been damaged. The kitchen had been partially gutted, preparations for the renovation they had planned, no doubt. Linda's china cabinet was empty, the precious dishes we had received as wedding gifts nowhere to be seen. When I reached the second floor, the devastation was even worse. The master bedroom had been completely taken over by Robert and Susan, their clothes in the closet, their toiletries in the bathroom, their personal items on the dresser Linda and I had bought together on our 5th anniversary. Most heartbreaking was Linda's sewing room. The room I had preserved exactly as she left it. Her sewing machine, her fabric stash, the quilt she had been working on before she got sick, was now empty. Everything had been cleared out to make way for the nursery Jessica had mentioned. I stood in the doorway of that empty room, grief washing over me anew. It wasn't just my home they had taken, it was my memories, the physical reminders of the life Linda and I had built together. Dad? I turned to find David standing in the hallway, his face a mixture of shock and fear. He was dressed in his work clothes, an expensive suit that looked out of place in the home where he had grown up in jeans and t-shirts. David. I acknowledged my voice, steadier than I expected. What are you doing here? He asked as if I were the intruder. How did you get in? This is my home, David. I have every right to be here. He glanced around nervously. You can't just show up with the police. Jessica said you have a lawyer. Yes, I do, and we should go downstairs. There's a lot to discuss. In the living room, everyone had assembled Jessica and her parents on one side, Thomas Officer Jackson, Frank, Patty, and Barbara on the other. David's eyes widened when he saw Barbara. Aunt Barbara. "What are you doing here?" "Supporting your father," she said coldly. "Someone in this family needs to." Thomas took charge of the conversation, explaining the legal situation clearly and concisely. The house was legally mine. I had been illegally removed. The court had ordered Jessica's family to vacate the premises within 24 hours. Any property of mine that had been removed needed to be returned immediately. "Furthermore," Thomas continued, "we have reason to believe this is not the first time the Williams family has engaged in this type of behavior." He produced the documentation Barbara had gathered about their previous exploits. "We are prepared to pursue criminal charges for elder abuse fraud and illegal eviction if necessary." David's face had grown progressively paler as Thomas spoke. He looked to Jessica, who was whispering furiously with her parents. "This is all a misunderstanding," David finally said, his voice lacking conviction. "We were trying to help Dad. He's getting older and we thought—" "Save it, David," Barbara interrupted sharply. "You kicked your father out of his own home and told him to go to hell. That's not help. That's abuse." "Is that true, David?" Officer Jackson asked. "Did you forcibly remove your father from his home?" David looked trapped. "It wasn't like that." He agreed to leave. "Under duress and false pretenses," Thomas pointed out. "After being told you had power of attorney, which you don't." Jessica said, David began, then stopped himself looking at his wife. Jessica stepped forward, her composure regained. "This is a family matter that's being blown out of proportion. George was struggling to maintain this big house. We were simply trying to arrange a better living situation for everyone." "By throwing me out with nothing but a suitcase?" I asked quietly. "By taking over my home without my consent? By removing all traces of your mother?" This last question I directed at David. "Mum's been gone for 18 years, Dad," David said, but there was a flicker of shame in his eyes. "And I've kept her memory alive every day since," I replied, "until you and Jessica decided to erase it completely." Robert suddenly stepped forward, his face rigid with anger. "This is ridiculous. We've invested money in this property already. We've purchased new furniture, started renovations. Without the owner's permission," Thomas interjected, "which constitutes property damage, not improvement." "David assured us the transfer was being handled," Susan insisted, glaring at her son-in-law. David looked stricken. "I thought it would be. I didn't think Dad would fight it." "You didn't think I'd fight being thrown out of my own home?" I asked, incredulous. "You didn't think I'd object to being told to go to hell by my own son?" "I didn't mean that," David said weakly. "I was upset." "We all say things we don't mean when we're upset," Jessica interjected smoothly. "I'm sure we can work this out like adults. Perhaps a financial arrangement." "This isn't a negotiation," Thomas said firmly. "The court has ordered you to vacate the premises within 24 hours. Any personal belongings you've brought can be removed during that time. Anything belonging to Mr. Harrison that has been removed must be returned immediately." "Or what?" Robert challenged. "Or we file criminal charges for theft, property damage, elder abuse, and attempted fraud," Thomas replied calmly. "Given the documentation we have of similar incidents involving your family, I imagine the district attorney would be very interested in building a case." That seemed to deflate Robert's bluster. He exchanged a look with Susan, who nodded slightly. "Fine," Robert said tersely. "We'll leave, but our new furniture stays until we can arrange movers." "That's acceptable," Thomas agreed. But all of Mr. Harrison's belongings must be returned immediately, and an inventory taken before you leave to ensure nothing is missing. As the reality of their defeat sank in, Jessica's family began to splinter. Robert and Susan retreated upstairs, presumably to pack. Jessica pulled David into the kitchen for what looked like an intense conversation. Officer Jackson stayed to oversee the proceedings, while her partner began documenting the state of the house for the official report. In the midst of the chaos, I stood in my living room feeling strangely detached. I had won, but the victory felt hollow. The home I had fought to reclaim was damaged not just physically, but emotionally. Every room now carried the taint of betrayal. Barbara approached and put her arm around my shoulders. "You okay, George?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I got my house back, but you lost your son," she finished softly. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Linda would be proud of you," Barbara said, "for standing up for yourself, for not letting them walk all over you." "What would she think of David?" I asked, voicing the question that had been haunting me. Barbara sighed. She'd be heartbroken, but she'd also believe there was still hope for him. Linda always saw the best in people, especially her son. As the Williams family packed and Officer Jackson documented the damage to my property, David approached me cautiously. Jessica was nowhere to be seen. "Dad, can we talk?" he asked quietly. "Alone." I hesitated, then nodded. We stepped onto the back porch where David and I had spent countless evenings talking about school sports girls and life after he lost his mother. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. David stared at his expensive shoes, his shoulders slumped in a way I hadn't seen since Linda's funeral. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice barely audible. "I don't know what happened. It all just spiraled." "Spiraled, David. You threw me out of my own home. You told me to go to hell. That's not something that just happens." He looked up, his eyes wet with tears. "I know. And I can't explain it in a way that makes any sense. Jessica and her family, they have this way of making things seem logical, necessary. They kept talking about your age, about how you needed help, about how this arrangement would benefit everyone. And you believed them over your own father." "I wanted to believe them," he admitted. "Jessica's family has everything figured out. They know how to live, how to succeed. I wanted to be part of that. At any cost, even betraying your father, erasing your mother's memory." He flinched at the mention of Linda. "I never wanted that. They just started making changes and I didn't stop them. I should have stopped them." "Yes, you should have," I agreed. "But it goes deeper than that, David. You've changed. The son I raised would never have treated anyone the way you treated me, let alone his own father." "I know," he said, and for the first time I saw genuine remorse in his expression. "When Jessica called and said you were here with the police and a lawyer, it was like waking up from a bad dream. Suddenly I could see what I'd done, what I'd become. Dad, I'm so sorry." "I believe you're sorry now, David. But sorry doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't restore trust." "What can I do?" he asked, desperation in his voice. "How can I make this right?" I looked at my son. This man I had raised, loved, and apparently failed in some fundamental way, and felt a complicated mixture of anger, grief, and love. "I don't know if you can make this right," I told him honestly. "Some broken things can't be fixed completely, but if you want to try it, starts with taking responsibility for your actions, all of them, not just the parts that are convenient to admit. It means making amends, which will take time and consistent effort. And most importantly, it means changing, really changing, not just saying what you think I want to hear. I will, he promised. I'll do whatever it takes. Including what happens with Jessica, I asked. Because she orchestrated this, David. She and her family planned to take advantage of me. His face fell. I don't know what to do about Jessica. I love her, but this is unforgivable. That's something you'll have to figure out for yourself, I said. But I won't have her or her family in my home again. That's a boundary I'm setting right now. He nodded, understanding the implications. I know. I need some time to think, to figure things out. Take the time you need, I said, but I need you to leave with them today. I can't have you here right now. The pain in his eyes was real, but so was my need for space and healing. I understand, he said quietly. Where will you stay? I'll be here in my home, I said firmly, where I belong. David nodded again, then turned to go back inside. At the door, he paused. I love you, Dad. I know I have a terrible way of showing it right now, but I do. I love you too, David, I said, because despite everything, it was still true. That's why this hurts so much. By evening, Jessica's family had removed their personal belongings and new furniture, leaving my house in disarray. David had gone with them, though he said he would be staying at a hotel, not with Jessica and her parents. Officer Jackson had completed her report, documenting the damage and missing items. Thomas had filed additional paperwork to ensure Jessica's family could not return. Frank, Patty, and Barbara helped me begin to restore order to my home. We found some of Linda's things boxed up in the garage, her china, her books, some of her clothes I had kept. Other items were simply gone, either taken or discarded. The physical damage to the house would take time and money to repair, but it was the emotional damage that felt most overwhelming. That night, after everyone had left, and I was alone in my house again, I sat in Linda's sewing room, empty now, except for a chair I had brought in from the guest room. I held her wedding ring in my palm and talked to her, as I often did when I needed guidance. I don't know what to do about David, Lynn, I said to the empty room. Part of me wants to forgive him immediately. Part of me never wants to see him again. Neither feels right. As always, there was no answer, but sitting in the quiet, I felt a sense of clarity slowly emerge. The path forward wasn't about either extreme, neither unconditional forgiveness nor permanent estrangement. It was about finding a middle way, a path of healing that honored both my pain and my love for my son. I slept in the guest room that night, unable to face the master bedroom that had so recently been occupied by Robert and Susan. Despite being back in my own home, I felt like a visitor, a stranger in a familiar place. The house would need time to feel like mine again, just as my relationship with David would need time to heal, if it could heal at all. The next morning, I began the process of reclaiming my home and my life. I called a locksmith to change all the locks. I contacted my bank to ensure my accounts were secure. I made an appointment with my doctor to document my excellent mental and physical health in case Jessica's family tried to pursue their false claims of cognitive decline. Frank and several other friends from the engineering firm came over to help me assess the damage and begin repairs. Barbara stayed for a week, helping me sort through what remained of Linda's things and providing the emotional support I desperately needed. Slowly, day by day, I began to rebuild not just my home, but my sense of security and self-worth. Thomas helped me create a living trust to protect my assets in the future. I joined a support group for victims of elder abuse, where I found understanding and guidance from others who had experienced similar betrayals. 2 weeks after the confrontation, David called and asked if we could meet for coffee at a neutral location. I agreed, setting firm boundaries about what I was willing to discuss. At a small cafe downtown, he informed me that he had moved out of the apartment he shared with Jessica and was filing for divorce. I realized I don't even know who I am when I'm with her, he said, looking older and more somber than I had ever seen him. Everything I did, every decision I made, was filtered through what she and her family wanted. I lost myself completely. I didn't offer forgiveness or reconciliation that day. Instead, I suggested that we meet once a month in public places to slowly rebuild whatever relationship might be possible. David agreed readily, seeming grateful for even this small opening. Our first few meetings were awkward, stilted conversations over coffee or lunch. We avoided the difficult topics, sticking to safe subjects like sports or current events. But gradually, as months passed, we began to address what had happened. David's vulnerability to Jessica's manipulation, his desire for status and wealth, his unresolved grief over losing his mother, my own failures as a father. 6 months after being kicked out of my home, I invited David to help me repair the backyard fence that had been damaged during Jessica's family's brief occupation. It was a simple project, but symbolic, rebuilding something together that had been broken. As we worked side by side in the yard, where I had taught him to play catch 25 years earlier, David said, "I don't expect you to ever fully trust me again, Dad. I know I broke something that can't be perfectly repaired. But I want you to know I'm trying to be the man you and Mom raised me to be. The man I lost sight of for a while." I looked at my son, flawed, fallible, but making a genuine effort to change, and felt the first real stirrings of forgiveness. Not the instant, unconditional forgiveness I might have offered immediately after the incident, which would have been premature and hollow. This was a deeper, more measured forgiveness, born of time and evidence of change. Trust can be rebuilt, I told him. It just takes time and consistency. We'll get there one day at a time. It's been a year since I was thrown out of my own home and told to go to hell by my only son. The experience changed me profoundly. I learned that family bonds, while precious, are not unbreakable. I discovered strengths within myself I never knew existed. I found that forgiveness is possible even after the deepest betrayals, but it comes on its own timeline and with its own conditions. My house is fully restored now, though I've made some changes that reflect my new perspective on life. I've converted Linda's sewing room into a home office where I volunteer remotely for an elder rights advocacy group, helping others who have experienced abuse or exploitation. I've added security features to the house and created legal protections for my assets that ensure I'll never be vulnerable in the same way again. David and I continue our slow journey of reconciliation. After his divorce was finalized, he moved to a small apartment across town and started therapy to understand how he had become someone capable of such betrayal. We have dinner together twice a month now, and while our relationship will never be what it was before, it has evolved into something new, more honest, more equal with clearer boundaries. Jessica and her family faced consequences for their actions. Thomas's investigation, combined with Barbara's research, uncovered a pattern of elder exploitation that resulted in civil penalties and restitution to previous victims. They moved out of state after the scandal damaged Robert's business reputation, and I haven't heard from them since. The most important lesson I learned through this ordeal is that dignity is not negotiable. As we age, society often tries to diminish our autonomy, our right to self-determination, our value. Sometimes this comes from strangers, but more painfully, sometimes it comes from those closest to us. Standing up for myself wasn't just about reclaiming my home. It was about asserting my worth as a person, regardless of my age. I also learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or allowing yourself to be vulnerable to the same harm again. True forgiveness comes with wisdom and protective boundaries. I can love my son while still holding him accountable. I can open my heart again without leaving myself defenseless. If you're watching this and facing your own family betrayal, know that you're not alone. There are resources, advocates, and laws to protect you. Your age doesn't diminish your rights or your value. Fight for yourself even when it's painful, even when it means confronting those you love. Your dignity matters. And to those who've never experienced such betrayal, cherish the genuine connections you have. Support the older adults in your life with respect and love. Remember that true family is defined not by blood or legal ties, but by consistent care, respect, and love. Before I go, I'd like to ask you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to take advantage of you? How did you handle it? Your experiences might help someone else facing a similar situation. Also, please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you found my story meaningful. I share these painful experiences not for sympathy, but in the hope that they might help someone else find their courage in dark times. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself and reclaim your dignity. I'm living proof of that.